Okay, so for today, we've got two great speakers, both of whom live down here in Boise, are very involved in conservation. And they've been working on a really interesting project with other activity organizations, conservation organization. I know Treasure Valley Cycling Alliance, Boise Bicycle Project, among others. And I think the one thing that has really struck a chord with many of us is how collaborative this project is and how successful they are because of the collaboration of the different people and organizations and all of the networking that they've done. So today we have Austin Walkins, and Austin is the climate campaign coordinator with Idaho Conservation League. And we also have Eric Willadsen, and Eric is the conservation program manager at the Sierra Club Idaho chapter. So again, feel free to interrupt them with questions, raise your digital hand, type questions in the chat box. Go ahead, Austin and Eric, whoever's going to start.
Yeah, I will get this going, and I'm going to share a presentation here with you all. So hopefully this is up now and everyone kind of sees this. Yeah, I just want to open with kind of what Cynthia just hit on, the collaborative process of all of this. Eric and I are really excited to talk about this today, but this is in no way just our project. This is a huge group effort, and this is only some of the folks involved. So really want to give a shout out to all the groups that are making this work possible. This, I guess, kind of a way of introduction. This all started out a couple years ago with myself and Casey Mattoon, who is with Sierra Club as well. I live out in West Boise, and we love being on the Greenbelt, but then we realized that it was a little distant from us, whereas we had a bunch of canals running through our neighborhood, and there's one in particular that a lot of community members use, even though you're not supposed to use it, kind of the classic canal story. And we were like, man, like what if we actually really took a stab at, trying to make this a thing? We always want to recognize we're not the first people to look at a map of the Treasure Valley and say, oh, those canals would make great bike paths. That I think a lot of people see this potential. We just have kind of hit this right time. A lot of interest. Some variables have changed, and yeah, it's some good progress that we're excited to report on today. So Eric and I are going to kind of pass this presentation back and forth. And as Cynthia said, interrupt us anytime, and we're happy to answer questions. So with that, I think I'm going to turn this over to Eric. And Eric, if you just kind of want to give me some signals of when to change slides, I will do that.
Thanks, Austin. Thanks, Cynthia and Idaho Walk Bike Alliance for having us. I'm actually going to turn it on to everyone else at this point. I'd love to let people take a second or two and kind of think about what open space, those two words, mean to you, and try to picture that in your head and think of all the different ways that you use open space in your community. If folks want to just come off mute and share some of those, that would be great.
Hey, this is Rachel Grosso. I would just like to put forward that more so than ever in my life, open spaces become important because it feels like a safe place to meet with people who are outside of my household. I'm a household of one, and so I need those safe spaces, and parks and plazas, and to a certain extent the Greenbelt even has become that for me in the past few months.
I love hiking in the foothills all the time. I live right adjacent to them, so I do a lot of hiking out there. And it'd be great to have more bikeways connecting everything.
I think this time has caused all of us to maybe redefine what open space is to us. I know our family has used the river a lot more this year, not by formally floating or anything, but just walking down to the edge of the bank and sitting our lawn chair in it. And enjoying the water flowing by with all the people. So canals, I think, offer that same kind of opportunity, not getting in the water, but being near something that seems more natural and not as formal as some of the things that we typically think of when we think of recreation.
Eric, this is Tom. I kind of like to think of the canal pathways as like a circulatory system. So they all lead back to the heart of that Boise River Greenbelt, and provide that additional connectivity all across the city.
Hey, this is Jared. For me, open space really speaks to equity and how we all have access to the same space. We may use it differently, but we all have the ability to actually use that space for something for ourselves. That's a special thing in the community.
This is Dan Verbaten from Teton Valley, and I would say out here, open space also means preservation of the agricultural heritage of this valley.
And then going once, going twice. I'm gonna keep going through the presentation. Thanks for everyone who shared. I think kind of hold on to what was shared so far, because I think there'll be some common strands that'll make themselves known throughout the presentation. Austin, if you want to go to the next slide. I think one thing is that I really want to make sure is clear before we start talking about canal pathways and what our coalition has been up to is that this really isn't a new concept. There's City of Boise documents from the 1970s identifying pathways along canals as an opportunity for recreation. I think rightly so. It felt like the city, historically, from someone who's only been here for 9 years, has really focused on preserving the foothills and the river corridor. But we've seen a lot of success in other places in the Treasure Valley. They didn't have access necessarily to the river or to the foothills. Meridian has been able to establish some pathways along canals, along with Nampa. Idaho Falls also has recently established a circulatory loop concept and gotten Department of Transportation funding from it. And then regionally, we've seen pathways along canals. In Phoenix and nationally, there's some really great examples out on the East Coast for pathways along canals, although those canals were used more for transportation than just water delivery. So as a coalition, I think some of the spaces that we're trying to fill is to advocate for a Treasure Valley-wide off-road bike path system master plan, which would inevitably lead into like a low-stress bike network or likewise systems that could be adopted across municipalities and counties. Also showing that there's visible public support for this. I worked for the Land Trust of the Treasure Valley for 3 years and felt like every time I took volunteers out into the foothills or along the river to do restoration projects or trail maintenance projects, there's always someone who brought up this idea of like, there's this road next to this canal. Why can't I go out and use it and bike on it and walk on it and use it to get to a bus stop for transportation purposes? And it always felt like there's this air of impossibility around it and around that conversation, and just that politically, legally, financially could be difficult to accomplish something like that. And hopefully we can share some success stories that can help show that it is possible. And then we also want to make sure that we're ensuring safe practices. I know, Elaine, you already mentioned like not swimming in canals. That's something that we want to make sure that we're not, people know we're not advocating for that. And we're also not advocating for things like jet skiing or anything like that in the waterways. You can go to the next slide, Austin. And I think one thing we also want to really make sure too is that like we're celebrating and expanding on 50 years of success. The Boise River Greenbelt is an incredible like asset to the community. But as the Treasure Valley has grown, it's been increasingly difficult for all, not just Boise, but all Treasure Valley residents to access some of our most favorite trails and pathway systems and recreational opportunities. I know residents in Kuna or in Southwest Boise have to drive upwards of 20 minutes just to get to the Greenbelt. So that's not even using their bike to get there. And so, and like Tom mentioned as well, you know, this is an opportunity to create the circulatory system that weaves in and out of the greenbelt and provides more than just recreation. And it can provide options for active transportation. It can provide options to connect in with public transit options. There was the most recent study I've been able to find shows that 87% of Ada County residents can feel unsafe using walking or cycling as their primary mode of transportation to get to and from somewhere. That study was from 2009. I know things have improved since then. And if someone has a more up-to-date study, I would love to see it because I haven't been able to find it, and it might exist. But I think the canal pathways is just like having pathways along canal is just a really incredible opportunity to provide access to the greenbelt, potentially access to the foothills as well for recreation, and then provide an interwoven system to meet transportation needs and provide that equity. You can go to the next slide, Austin. And I think as I was diving into this after spending 3 years at the Land Trust and kind of hearing about how this would be really difficult, after starting at the Sierra Club, I got about 1.5 years ago, was spending some time researching what this could look like and what it does already look like across the Treasure Valley. And it's real, and there's opportunities and tools, and you know, there's models out there that work to help establish legal pathways along canals and along irrigation ditches and laterals. And a lot of this is woven into the agricultural legacy as well that we have across the Treasure Valley. Meridian has established somewhere around 30 miles of off-road paths. They have a master plan that includes 133 miles. Nampa has about 13, and Caldwell has about 3 miles of pathways. Most of that is along their greenbelt, but there's about 1.5 miles of it that actually runs along but an open paved section of Indian Creek that resembles a canal. And there'll be a picture of that later on. And then this graphic is also from the Meridian Master Plan for pathways. And it just shows different ways that these pathways can be used to help mitigate any sort of intrusion, safety issues for users. You hear radio ads from irrigation districts all the time about the dangers of falling in a canal. Drowning, it's real. You look at the New York Canal, it's scary looking. But there's plenty of research that's been done in some of these other examples of pathway systems that popped up across the West that show that safety issues really can be mitigated with smart design. Irrigation districts are able to maintain access for conducting maintenance, and users are able to also just be extra eyes on the area, make sure that if someone is in distress, they can be helped, and generally crime rates go down. So there's just plenty of examples in statistics and studies that show that something like this is really doable. And there's models across the valley that show that we can do it here in Idaho too.
I think this is when I take over. So as we saw, early on, we realized that to really get this accomplished, it was going to take a diverse group of stakeholders who were engaged on this. And one of the things we thought it would be good is to establish kind of some guiding vision or some guiding principles of what we're actually trying to accomplish. And this has kind of come up in some of the feedback already, or the discussion already here. But connectivity was this really top tier guiding principle. We wanted, I think it was Tom who came up, had the term, the circulatory system. How do we help connect to existing infrastructure? So connectivity is a big one. There's 3 more things that I'm just going to run through really quick. These kind of metrics of, if you've seen a map of all the canal infrastructure throughout the Treasure Valley, it's massive. And it didn't quite make sense to tackle trying to build pathways along every single canal pathway. So we set up just kind of this 3 guide filter. The first one being, within 1 mile of homes. That was kind of the first pass. close to other mixed use pathways. This kind of gets back to that connectivity. Ideally, we don't just want a bunch of separated small segments that aren't connected to a broader network. And then the third one is a safe used public space. So again, some of these themes have already come out in the discussion today, but something that people feel safe on. It's widely available to everyone. So those three things kind of are guiding where we're focusing the efforts right now on. And I think.
And there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's a few examples from across the country that we're kind of modeling our efforts after. You can go to the next slide, Austin. I think the original concept of using an irrigation district or irrigation like ditch lateral system to establish pathways really came from Phoenix in the early part of the 1900s. There's 60 plus miles of connective pathways that weave in and out of almost every municipality, neighborhood, community down in the Phoenix metropolis area. This was something that the irrigation district down there actually wanted to have established for the community as it grew. And there's still ongoing work down there. I think like what we're seeing with the Greenbelt, it's been 50 years. The original vision was to get that at least connected down to the confluence with the Snake River. That effort is still ongoing, just like this pathway system in Phoenix is still ongoing. But it's something that they really market not just as a recreational asset, even though it is that, but they also market it as a transportation option for everyone who lives down there. And I can't say who said this, but it is someone who's associated with one of the irrigation districts in the Treasure Valley. He said he actually, they had like an irrigation district conference down there that he went to that was in Tempe. It was right off of that blue Tempe Canal route that you can see kind of in the middle right section of this map. And he said it was like, he loved it. And he said personally, he would love to see a pathway system like this that preserves access for them to be able to do their maintenance, but also provides access for recreation and transportation. The thing that he really loved about it is that people down there knew that the irrigation district and irrigation districts were an integral part of making sure that the community is what it is. We wouldn't be living in the city in the middle of the desert without the work that the irrigation districts have done over the last century plus to help establish where our neighborhoods are. And he said there's interpretive signs along the path that tell that story. And because of that, and because of the presence of the pathway system, people there understand that it's like the irrigation district is important and it's a part of the history of our community in a really profound way. And he said that's something that he feels like is lost up here. He feels like they often get cast as the bad guys, that the people who block cool things from happening. And he hopes someday that can change and that understanding of their importance can change, and sees this as a potential pathway for that to happen. Yeah, and you can go to the next slide. And, organizationally, as far as like helping to establish,
Hey, Eric, it's Cynthia. I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I think that Carl had some thoughts or questions that he wanted to say.
Okay, cool.
I think you're on mute, Carl. Carl, I think you're on mute.
Eric, this is Carl Whaley. I spent about the last 25 years living in Phoenix, and I really enjoyed their bicycle paths along the canals down there. One of the advantages down there is that the canals were not privately owned. They're owned by government entities, whereas I understand a lot of your canals up here are privately owned, which makes a difference. Down there, one of the big problems was assuming liability. There is going to be accidents on the canals. Who's going to take care of the liability? So,
Yeah.
okay, I'll unmute.
Cool. And I think that's a really good point. I mean, you're right. Like the underlying private property ownership is definitely like a huge mixed bag here compared to down in Phoenix. And it can vary from irrigation district to irrigation district. Like the New York Canal is mostly owned by that irrigation district, whereas others are a mix of some public ownership. So there's some ACHD right-of-ways on some of the canals. And then it's a mix of private ownership. And I know with Meridian, they've tackled this in different ways. They have been able to get easements put in place through offering some sort of small financial incentive, like $1,000 to provide public access, and then placing a conservation easement on that property and taking on liability. So there are like, you're right, it's like more complicated here than it is in Phoenix. But yeah, like Meridian and Nampa have found some solutions to that. And a lot of those are modeled after how we got the Greenbelt established as well. I don't think that, at least some of the, the barriers that have come up, I think came up as well for the Greenbelt. And there's probably people on this call, especially, that can speak much more knowledgeably about that than I can. But I'm really glad you asked that question, for sure. As far as from like an organizing, like let's organize around this concept, I think we really took our cue from the Denver system. They have about 100-ish miles of pathways at this point that's interconnected across that municipal area. And kind of the same thing. I think irrigation district was reluctant to let this happen, and there were some grassroots organizing that just helped to show that there was like a lot of public support for pursuing something like this in the early 60s. And they have added on to this system as time has gone on. The other thing that I really think is cool about the Denver system is that they've engaged neighborhoods and communities where they are and allowed those communities to help kind of determine what the pathways look like as they go through their neighborhoods. So, some neighborhoods that have more rural characteristics to them advocated to keep the pathways gravel or dirt. The more urban areas have paved pathways because it is a much more transportation focused in developing those paths. So, and I know I've heard from folks in Northwest Boise that they would love to see, potential pathways out there kept dirt because there's lots of equestrians out there, and pavement can be a barrier for horseback riders. So.
I think I'm taking this one. So yeah, talking about how this kind of connects into the existing system that we have in the Treasure Valley. Again, we're speaking about the Treasure Valley. Some of these lessons can be applied elsewhere in Idaho. It's just our kind of coalition is focused on the Treasure Valley. So sorry to all the participants outside of the Treasure Valley on this one. Just kind of a snapshot of Boise, kind of understanding where we are relative to the rest of the Treasure Valley. A big motivator behind this was transportation. I think a lot of us, we view some of these potential canal pathways as this great recreational opportunity, but there's also a huge opportunity around transportation. And those aren't all, transportation and recreation are different. You can use the same pathway for both, but we like talking about this and really focusing on transportation because it just kind of helps frame why now might be more of an appropriate time versus in the past when folks have tried to get pathways along canals. And, this is, I want to say this is a freeway down in LA. I forget, maybe the 405, I forget which one, but this concept of induced demand, if you build it, they will come. The more lanes you add, the more cars show up to fill those lanes, and you're just in this inevitable process, this cat and mouse game. I think the Treasure Valley is already experiencing that. We're seeing huge construction projects along the freeway, kind of on our western edge. And you're also seeing developments come in and people psychologically are saying, oh, like there's bigger freeways so I won't be stuck in traffic. Well, when thousands of people are thinking about that and they're all driving alone in their vehicles, you just create more traffic. And so part of the reason from the transportation side of this, we're really focused on let's stop pouring money into widening freeways, and maybe let's look at putting resources into moving people around in different ways. Micromobility, I know none of us are an expert, or at least I'm not an expert on this, but I don't, some of you probably participate in commuter rides, May in Motion here in the Treasure Valley. And it was a year or two ago. I forget who the speaker was, but it was this national group who works on transportation planning. And they say, you know, they do these 5, 10-year, 20-year studies on transportation. And 5 years ago, no one predicted Lime scooters or birds. I don't know what they're called, the electric scooters. And that just reshaped transportation in certain aspects of cities. And this concept of micromobility, I think it was a Grist article, I forget the source, but there was a recent article that said the bus, the bike, and the elevator are the transportation options of the future. And I think canal pathways are a part of that. You know, if you have a safe alternative to driving alone in your car, being a part of traffic, people are going to want to take that. I mean, we see that on the Greenbelt. If we expand that out to other parts of communities throughout the Treasure Valley, the same concept applies. If you build it, they will come. So that's kind of another guiding principle. You can't ignore the growth too. I don't know, this kind of speaks for itself, but the Treasure Valley is a really great place to live, and people want to live here. And the more people that come here, just the more traffic, the more congestion, the more everything we're going to see. So how do we start building projects and alleviating what stress we know is going to come on the horizon? Let's start doing that work today, not wait until it's already a huge problem. These are all things that everyone in this group is probably well aware of, but just hitting them just for, I don't know, sake of clarity. The other interesting thing, I alluded to this early on, but you know, others have tried this in the past, and I think a big part of our success is just the diverse stakeholder group that we've gotten. I think another part of this is it's this growth factor. It's these pressures on the existing system. One of those levers that we kind of have to play with is the cool thing about this diverse stakeholder group is we all bring a different expertise to the table, and we all can apply that expertise to this effort to try to make it advance. So one of the neat things, the picture on the right here, that's the city of Nampa's wastewater treatment plant. So this is all the sewage that we flush down our drains, goes and gets treated here, at least in Nampa. And the city of Nampa is now planning to discharge to Phyllis Canal. Rather, in the past, they've discharged to Indian Creek. And the reason why that's a potential kind of lever that we can pull is, you know, cities are working with these canal districts or irrigation districts. And, you know, Eric and others have talked about the challenges of the ownership with these canals. And as we start to build these partnerships, and we've talked to the city of Nampa about this canal project, so getting those cross communications, like the wastewater treatment plant guys saying, hey, you know, we need to discharge to your canal. What if we get a pathway along this canal too? Like, that can be part of the conversation. Or the irrigation district, if they're interested in it and they say, hey, like, we'll take your water, but you need to build a canal or a pathway along our canal. Just trying to explore every option we have to get pathways along these canals. And then the other thing is just air quality. So the water treatment plants obviously focused on water. Air quality is another rising concern in the Treasure Valley. The more people, the more cars, that's just the more air pollution. If you live in Ada County, you're aware of this. You have to go to these red vans and get your car tested to make sure it's operating properly. And if it's not, it can be timely and costly to get that fixed. The graph or the bars down on the bottom, this is a plot of the air quality for Boise over the past 5 years. And these colors correspond to the air quality index. So, you know, it's, to be honest, this is nothing compared to like some cities that really struggle with traffic. You know, if you pulled up LA's, it'd look a lot worse, but it's not perfect. In the summer months, especially, we see a lot of bad air quality days. And I should, it's a little deceiving here, but some of this data has had wildfire smoke scrubbed from it. So if you included all the wildfire smoke that we get over the years, you'd see it a lot worse. There's a whole other explanation for that I won't go into, but just so you know, like this graph kind of captures some of that transportation air pollution we're seeing. And so that's just another lever that we can pull to kind of encourage folks to pursue alternative forms of transportation throughout the Treasure Valley, rather than just more single occupancy vehicles spewing out pollution and clogging up our freeways. I'll turn it back over to Eric here.
And really, I think this is about asking the question about what would the story of a pathway system in the Treasure Valley be, and what is the future of transportation going to be here? And how can all these different efforts interconnect with one another to create a really equitable living environment for all of us in the Treasure Valley? You can go to the next slide. And we know that there's examples of this working all over the Treasure Valley, and it's how can we inspire a way for this all to get connected into one system that helps link communities and neighborhoods while also preserving the unique qualities of each one. You can go to the next slide. Awesome. And there's just, there are pathway master plans that are being put together, that have been put together. I think Austin and I gave a very similar presentation to Meridian Parks and Recreation Commission back in like February or March, 10 years ago before the pandemic started. And, Cody Swander from Nampa was there to also, so that they could start that conversation with Meridian about how to start connecting their master plans. I think it was Zach and Tom from the city of Boise were invited for the following month to talk about this. So this is a conversation that's definitely happening. I think as advocates and organizers, we're just hoping to help find ways to be additive and like move this along because it is happening, and it'd be great to start seeing these connections happen. Austin alluded to him and Casey talking about this canal that they live near up, which is the Settlers Canal, which there were some pictures of Casey's dogs running along earlier in the presentation. There aren't no trespassing signs on that, but that runs through Garden City. I mean, that is an opportunity. Boise has made some great progress putting pathways in there near Hyatt Hidden Lakes and a planned park near Capitol High School. Meridian has a lot of that paved and open to the public already. And then you have Garden City, and it connects down from Southwest Boise and Meridian down right basically to downtown to Catherine Albertson Park. Obviously, the Interstate 184 would be a pretty big barrier to getting it all the way to Catherine Albertson Park. But these are just like some of the examples of how like these connections are really coalescing around each other and starting to converge. And kind of like what Idaho Falls did, that they put it together in a master plan and found opportunities to find big funding to implement it on a much faster timeline than they had originally planned. So I think there's 15, if you want to go to the next slide, Austin, I think it will be a better display of what I'm about to say. There's 1,500 miles of canal, irrigation laterals and canals and ditches. I don't think we're going to get pathways along every single mile of that, especially since some of these are pretty overgrown or small. But amongst 1,500 miles of all of these, there's got to be opportunities out there to create a pathway system that connects into every neighborhood, especially when you start talking about the low stress bike network and having improvements for cycling and pedestrian infrastructure on our roads as well. It's just kind of exciting and a little bit overwhelming for myself to think about as well. But I think I would love to just like open it up, and if people want to answer that question about like what would the story of this pathway system be in the future, or have other questions, I think we can just open it up for discussion now.
I have a question that I'd like to ask you guys. And I think you're focusing on Boise currently, is that right? Or are you looking at the whole Treasure Valley?
I think both. It's made sense to focus on Boise at this point.
Okay, well, I'm wondering about the canal system. Do you go talk to one organization, or do you have to talk to multiple organizations? How challenging is it to go out and meet with the right people to do this?
The initial outreach was like a mix of talking to city and county officials, elected officials, and some irrigation district staff and officials, just to kind of get a concept of like what are the barriers, what is possible, what would need to happen. I think, as I know, Sierra Club is like this huge organization. ICL is a big nonprofit in our state. We don't have the resources to make something like this happen on the ground. So I think our initial goal was to make sure that there's municipal buy-in across the valley, because ultimately like I mentioned before, like I don't think irrigation districts are like the bad guys in the story. They just have interests that aren't pertaining to establishing pathways, and that request really has to come from our elected officials in the counties and the cities. So that was our initial target, was to get municipalities on board with pursuing opportunities like this.
So Eric, Austin, I can pipe in here, and Tom, if you have more information, go ahead. The city of Boise did agree to do a canal master plan, canal pathway master plan, and we're actually beginning work on that next week. I just got an invitation to a meeting about it to begin getting organized. I think Boise, while there's still tremendous opportunity in Boise, there's also some unique challenges. Meridian got started much later, and their canals were still open around them. And so as development happened, rather than after development, the land was set aside for the pathways. In Boise, we have a situation where many of those canals are built right to the bank, or right to the easement line, and the maintenance road on the one side is really the only access to them. And so I think in some instances we're going to have to figure out, can we allow users on that maintenance road while it's still being used as a maintenance road? Obviously, as Austin talked about, that already happens in many places, but it's not officially sanctioned anywhere. I think in addition, Carl mentioned another unique challenge, especially for those of us who've come a little later to the game and where development's already happened. We have many of the canals, rather than being a right-of-way of their own, even though the canal companies are a government subdivision, often the land they run through is private property with just an easement for the canal use. And when you try to establish an easement for any other kind of use, a pathway specifically, many of those private property owners object and will not allow that to happen. We've had that in a lot of cases in Boise. And so part of this, I think, education about why it would be actually a good thing for your property, a good thing for your property value to have a canal pathway accessible behind you, would be really helpful in convincing some of those private property owners to participate in this.
I think those are all great points. And Tom, I don't know if you're about to say something, so I apologize if I cut you off here, but this kind of gets at Cynthia's question and then also the discussion we're having, but our plan early on was just to talk to as many people as we could and get buy-in. and then also kind of spurred this conversation in rooms that we weren't in. When this all started, it was three of us with ICL, CVI, and Sierra Club, myself, Casey, and Crystal Rain, who just kind of like, hey, what if we started talking to people about this? Now we've evolved, and we have like bike and pedestrian groups, we have health groups, we have community groups, which is amazing. Early on, though, we realized 3 conservation groups talking about this very contentious issue was not the best optics. So the goal was to kind of talk to people and then encourage those people to talk to their circles and just get this conversation spreading. One of the things we learned early on, I remember we thought the big thing was going to be liability. Like irrigation districts, all they were going to care about was making sure that they weren't liable. So we did a bunch of research on, what would it look like if a city took on liability? None of us are lawyers, so like I'm not going to opine on that, but I know we found some interesting examples. And then some of the early conversations we had with the irrigation district staff was, the big thing is maintenance. The 2 things they said was, if you do this, call them a pathway. Don't call it a green belt, because we don't want people to expect this nice paved, pristine like green belt, when really like it could be a dirt path. And so we very intentionally used the word pathway. And then the other one was this maintenance question of, if you have those shared access points where users are also on the road or path, whatever that construction crews would use, the irrigation district staff said, we can't have anything that keeps us from doing the maintenance that we need to do. Like if we need to get in there to remove something, the pathway needs to close down. We don't have answers to those questions, but it was just really interesting to learn what was some of the most pressing issues for them, and what were the barriers that we needed to work around, that we didn't honestly see right from the start. So just, like I said, not an answer to the question, just some added context.
Maybe I can add one more thing. So within the city of Boise, we have 13 different irrigation districts. So going back to Cynthia, your question is that's 13 different organizations, whether it's Nampa Meridian Irrigation District, Settlers, New York Canal, that individually we'll have to be meeting with each one of them, and each one is going to have different requirements.
So I have a question. First, I'd like to thank Austin and Eric for the presentation and for really getting the ball rolling on this, because you're right. A lot of people don't feel comfortable biking on our roads, even when we provide bike lanes for them to bike on. So thank you so much. This is fabulous. And I did listen to the presentation during the Boise City Council meeting that Zach and Tom gave. And I'm really thankful that the city of Boise is working on this also. So what I'm wondering is, so you've been talking to some of the irrigation districts. Are they receptive to this? They're giving you feedback, but are they receptive to having this actually happen? Thank you.
I'll take a stab, Eric, and then if I miss anything, you can follow up. Yeah, I would, I think it depends on the irrigation district. I think it sounds like, and Eric may have to clarify, we've all done different outreach, so Eric may clarify some things, but my understanding is talking to some of the staff and talking to some people that will be taking over positions, there's a lot of support, or at least interest, like willingness to talk about this and pursue this. The current leadership, maybe not so much. So, I think we're really looking at this. This is going to be a long project. We don't think any of this is going to happen anytime soon, but we do think as some turnover occurs, more supportive staff will start filling those roles that could then make some of these decisions. Eric, does that capture it adequately?
Yeah, it's just been a mixed bag. the conversations that I've had, and I've talked with 3 irrigation districts since we started doing this, the conversations have really been centered around, like, if this is going to work, this is what we would need to have happen in order to preserve access so we can continue to keep things operational. It's not in our mission to have pathways. It's in our mission to make sure we continue to deliver water. But those were like informational interviews that we conducted with the irrigation districts. We weren't going there to make those asks. So
I might be able to offer a little insight. I did go and actually make an ask of an irrigation district board for a specific pathway. I know some people were disappointed at the outcome of that meeting. I was actually pleased with the outcome because we did not get a hard no. They didn't say, no, we're not interested. No, we think this is a terrible idea. They brought up all of the challenges that they will face if we do it, and made it really clear that if we could overcome those challenges, they'd be interested, but that they had to be able to maintain, they had to be able to do the things that are in their mission today. And so, I guess from my perspective, and taking the long view of it, the Greenbelt started as an idea in 1963. In late 1960s, the city of Boise took the first action that made it real. And by mid-1970s, the political leadership of not just the city, but the surrounding region started to get on board. I guess I'd see the same thing happening here. Canal district boards are elected boards, and I think the more that they begin to hear about this, the more they begin to see support for the work they do from the people who would also use these pathways, the more they'll understand that there's maybe some synergies here and some benefits.
I just really quick, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, so sorry, Eric, but tomorrow night the Canals Connect Communities Coalition is going to do a Q&A with a candidate running for the Nampa Meridian Irrigation District. And so just wanted to flag that as an opportunity for folks. As Elaine just said, if you wanted to I believe Mr. Patterson has held the position of, I think it's director is the title for the Nampa Meridian Irrigation District before. So he's knowledgeable about like what goes on. And now he took some time off, then he's rerunning. So if you're interested, maybe reach out to Eric or I, and we can help connect you with that, give you the Zoom link. But just wanted to throw that out there in case folks were interested.
Jeff, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. If you can hear me here, I'm in Idaho Falls. And I had to step away, so if you already covered this, I apologize. But my question was, the city of Idaho Falls has signed a master canal pathway agreement with the Idaho Irrigation District a couple of years ago here. And as part of that, the city has assumed pretty much all maintenance activities for the canal banks, not in the canal where they clear it out, but the banks of the canal are now going to be maintained by the city. And my question was, are there other cities in Idaho that have done the same, where they've assumed the maintenance duties in exchange for public access along the canal banks and in placing of pathways along there? I'll just mute myself now.
I know, I'm 100% sure that Meridian has assumed weed maintenance along the canals. And I'm like 80% sure Nampa has as well. As far as like actually like the rest of the bank maintenance, I'm not sure.
That's bank maintenance, right? Not canal maintenance.
Oh, and also the city of Idaho Falls assumed all the liability for any accidents or whatever that happen along there, as well as trash cleanup, et cetera, placing trash cans, et cetera. So they very much took the whole thing for the banks, almost like, it becomes almost like public property now, where the city is responsible for all that. So, yeah, thank you.
I'll jump in with a question for Eric or Austin. I know you all have been working on this now for a couple of years, and I know you haven't hit your goal yet, but you've made some great progress. We have people attending today who are from other parts of the state, and I'm assuming that they're interested in doing something similar. How would you recommend that they get started on this effort?
I'll take a stab at this one, and I would just say start talking and don't stop talking. It's really been, and like go into that with an open mind. I think we really started this with just kind of an idea of like, hey, what would it take? Rather than like, we're going to get this done, we asked the question, what would it take? And we went to cities and we went to different community groups and irrigation districts, and we just said, what would it take? And we've learned a lot, but we've also gotten a lot of partners on board. And I think the reason where we are at where we are today is because so many people have kind of been able to take some ownership of this, like, oh, it would take this and I can do that. And so it's really helped build support for this. And then just keep the conversation going. It's going to take so long that I think any chance we get to talk about this with groups like this or elected leaders, keep that conversation alive so people, it's at the top of their heads and they're always asking and wondering, where we're at with it and what would it take to get it even further. So that's.
And all that too, like push back on any talk about it being impossible. I think we have great case studies here in the state. They're all public documents, so we have some copies of some of those agreements between municipalities and the irrigation districts. First copy I actually saw came from Nampa Meridian Irrigation District. They forwarded it to me in Crystal Rain after a meeting. It didn't even come from the city itself. So I think that's something that we're happy to share. And yeah, it's been interesting. There's been a lot of I've had a handful of people reach out from kind of like Emmett, Weiser area that are really interested in like connecting the Weiser River Trail with utilizing canal pathways. I know State Parks is interested in looking at this as well. So it's like, I think that we're really focused on the Treasure Valley, but like there's momentum for this to expand elsewhere throughout the state. So.
Thanks, you guys. Nina?
Yeah, I just wanted to hop in and let everyone know if you're not able to make the meeting tomorrow, we're also going to be talking a lot about how to find out if you can vote in that election and what the steps are if you can. If you can't make it, I'm going to put my email in the chat box and you can shoot me an email to get that kind of action item of like, here's how I figure out if I can vote for it, because it gets really tricky with the Nampa Meridian Irrigation District. So I'll be sharing some action items that you can take or share with your friends to take, because this election is probably one of the more important steps to this initiative, to get some real awesome momentum from that district that we need to work with.
That was going to be my question to Austin and Eric. I am a property owner with the New York Canal. So only as property owner, I pay dues to the New York Canal, so I'm one of the few people who get to vote for our board members. Same goes for Nampa and whatnot. This is the only reason I've heard about this is because I happen to be here. So you guys haven't done any reach out to actual property owners, from what I can tell.
No, we haven't. I mean, other than talking to people who have come across, I know I've had. Yeah, some folks have reached out and we've talked with them, but it's not like we've gone door to door talking.
Yeah, because it'll actually need to be a door to door thing, because there's actually very few people who get to vote for the people on the board. And if that's where you're going to try and move things around, you're not going to get to it from a normal vote, because most people don't get to vote for canals unless they own property along it.
Yeah, and with this one, it's based with the property ownership and water rights. And so the candidates who are running have access to those who are within the district and may have property rights and have been sending their own pamphlets to the voters. And that is something that anyone can call the Nampa Meridian Irrigation District and get that information from voters and do their own outreach as well.
We are at 1 hour. I'll just put this out there. Does anybody else have a question before we say goodbye?
I do, yeah. Hi, this is Rachel Grosso. We talked a little bit about how this is a vision for the entire Treasure Valley, and I'm just curious if there has been any talk of going to Compass, perhaps, to start the initiative to get a Treasure Valley-wide plan for this. I mean, we will have the Meridian document and the Boise plan soon, but getting that cohesive document, I'm kind of thinking similar to ACHD's Roadways to Bikeways Master Plan, how that sets the vision. Is that something that the CCCC is looking to pursue?
Yeah, I've been to at least one of the active transportation work group meetings, and they're updating their bike ped master plan. And canal pathways are going to be a part of that moving forward. They're at least in the draft right now.
That's great news.
I'm on that committee too, and the railroads are also a part of that as well, but we're more concentrating on the railroads right now.
So what a great presentation and what an incredible project. Congratulations to all of you that have gotten this far. I think that it's taken a big effort on a lot of people to keep this pushed forward, and it's really remarkable.